What if the ocean is not empty? What if, beneath the black weight of the Indian Ocean, under crushing pressure, eternal cold, and miles of silence, there lies not only stone, but memory? Imagine a world before satellites, before coastlines were measured from orbit, before history was trapped inside textbooks and museums. Imagine a land stretching far beyond the southern edge of modern India, a land of river valleys, port cities, temple fires, and scholars who spoke of stars, kings, language, and the sea. Imagine a civilization that lived, traded, sang, wrote, and dreamed until the water rose and swallowed everything. For centuries, one name has drifted through Tamil memory like an echo from beneath the waves: Kumari Kandam. To some, it was a lost homeland. To others, the cradle of an ancient civilization. To others still, the myth born from grief, migration, and drowned coastlines. But what if all three are true in different ways? What if Kumari Kandam is not just a story about a vanished land? What if it is a story about how people remember disaster? About how memory survives where monuments fail? About how the sea can erase stone but never fully erase identity? Tonight, we descend into one of the most haunting legends of the ancient world, a forgotten southern land, a drowned civilization, a memory carried by poetry, and a question that refuses to die. Was Kumari Kandam a real place, a symbolic homeland, a geological misunderstanding, or a truth too old to fit neatly into modern categories? And if an entire world disappeared beneath the sea, what would remain first? Ruins, language, or longing? What if the deepest archive on Earth is not in a library, but underwater? And what if the ocean has been hiding history in plain sight? The sea keeps what the world forgets. Long before modern borders, before flags, censuses, and official timelines, the peoples of South India lived in close rhythm with the sea. The coast was not just geography, it was breath, it was trade, it was food, it was prayer, it was danger. The air smelled of salt, wet wood, smoke from hearth fires, fish drying on rope lines, coconut oil, and rain-soaked earth. Monsoon winds tore across the shore, boats creaked in the dark, nets slapped against the hulls. Marketplaces stirred at sunrise under a haze of spice, sweat, and sea mist. The shoreline was alive, and because it was alive, it was always vulnerable. In later Tamil traditions, there appears the memory of a vast southern land now lost beneath the Indian Ocean. This land was not described as empty wilderness. It was fertile, ordered, inhabited, a world of rivers, settlements, kings, poets, and learning, a world that existed before destruction. And then the sea came. Not all at once. That would be too simple, too clean. Real catastrophe is slower than legend remembers. It arrives in signs, in warnings, in little betrayals of the familiar. The tide reaches farther than it should. A field tastes of salt. A well turns bitter. Storms grow heavier. Fishermen return with fear in their faces. A shrine floods at high tide. Children are told not to play near the shore. One village moves inland, then another, then another. Night after night, the waves strike harder. Imagine the sound of it,
Wind screaming through palm groves, rain lashing roofs, the sea hammering black rock in the darkness while families sit awake, listening, knowing something has changed forever. Imagine waking before dawn and seeing that the path you walked your whole life is gone. Imagine a market square turned into surf. Imagine recognizing your own home only because the roof beam is still visible above the foam. This is how loss becomes sacred. This is how geography becomes myth. At the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose by more than 100 meters globally over long stretches of time. Coastlines across the world shifted. Habitable zones disappeared. Low-lying areas were drowned. Entire human communities would have seen the edges of their world retreat year after year, generation after generation. When people later spoke of lost lands beneath the sea, they may not have been inventing grief, they may have been preserving it. Because memory does not always keep dates, but it keeps terror, it keeps sound, it keeps the feeling of looking back at a place you know you will never walk again. What happens when land disappears, but identity remains? What happens when a people can no longer return home, yet refuse to forget where home once was? And when the sea takes everything visible, what is the first thing survivors save? Grain, gods, or story? First, the shoreline breaks. Then, memory hardens.
To understand why Kumari Kandam still matters, we have to step into one of the most powerful ideas in Tamil cultural memory, the three Sangams. The Sangams are described in later tradition as great assemblies of poets and scholars patronized by kings, where language, literature, philosophy, and culture were refined across generations. Whether one reads them literally, symbolically, or somewhere in between, their significance is enormous. They do not merely suggest literary activity, they suggest civilizational depth. And in some traditional accounts, the earliest Sangams were not held in the Tamil land visible on today's map. They were said to exist in lands that were later swallowed by the sea. That idea changes everything. It means the story is not simply, we had an old culture. It becomes, our oldest cultural centers were lost. Not only land, then, but libraries. Not only cities, but academies. Not only homes, but the very first chambers where language itself was shaped. This gives Kumari Kandam extraordinary power. It transforms a drowned landscape into a drowned archive. It turns literature into a survivor of catastrophe. It says, the map may have shrunk, but our civilization did not begin where your map begins. According to these traditions, poets gathered over generations. Kings patronized learning. Works were created, debated, and preserved. Then came destruction. Flood or submergence forced the movement of culture northward. The land was lost, but the language crossed the waters of time. That is why this legend is not just about geology. It is about prestige, inheritance, continuity, survival after rupture. If your temples sink, but your verses endure, were you truly erased? If the sea takes your academies, but not your language, what has really been lost? And if a people keep telling the same origin story for centuries, should we hear only myth or also memory? When cities drown, language becomes a lifeboat.
In the 19th century, a remarkable collision took place. A cultural memory met a scientific hypothesis. In 1864, the British zoologist Philip Sclater proposed the idea of a lost landmass called Lemuria. His reason was not mythology, at least not at first. He was trying to explain why lemur-like animals seemed distributed across places like Madagascar and India. At that time, continental drift had not yet become accepted science, so scholars often invented vanished land bridges to explain strange biological patterns. Lemuria began as a scientific guess. But guesses have a way of changing shape once they leave the laboratory. As geology advanced, the original scientific value of Lemuria weakened. Plate tectonics would later provide far better explanations for continental movement and species distribution. But before that happened, the idea escaped into a much stranger world. It was picked up by mystics, occult writers, esoteric thinkers, and above all, by theosophists. One of the most influential figures in that stream was Helena Blavatsky, co-founder of the Theosophical Society. In theosophical writing, Lemuria was no longer just a lost land bridge. It became a grand spiritual continent, a cradle of ancient races, forgotten wisdom, and vanished civilizations. And that is when the shift became profound. Because once Lemuria entered the imagination as an ancient lost world, it began to resonate with older regional memories of drowned southern lands. In some modern interpretations, the Tamil idea of Kumari Kandam became linked to this broader lost continent narrative. A literary memory and a speculative scientific theory fused together, and from that fusion, a new scale of legend was born. Now the story could be retold not merely as a lost homeland, but as something vaster, an ancient southern continent, a cradle of civilization, perhaps even a source world forgotten by mainstream history. This gave the legend new architecture, new maps, new ambition, new emotional force. Because it did not answer only one question, it answered many. Where did we come from? How old are we? What was taken from us? Why does the official story feel incomplete? And why does the ocean seem to guard something too large to be dismissed? But when science, spirituality, and memory are woven together, what are we left with? A theory, a symbol, or a longing dressed as evidence? And once a myth learns the language of science, who can easily separate the two again? What becomes stronger then, fact, imagination, or need? A hypothesis gave the legend a continent-sized shadow. Now we leave the realm of story and descend into geology. Modern science tells us something less romantic than the grand legend, but in some ways even more astonishing. Earth's crust is not fixed. Continents move, plates collide, land breaks apart, seafloor spreads. Fragments of ancient continental crust can survive beneath oceans for tens of millions of years. India itself was once part of Gondwana, the southern supercontinent that included Africa, Antarctica, Australia, Madagascar, and South America. Over immense spans of time, measured not in centuries, but in tens of millions of years, the Indian plate drifted northward and eventually collided with Asia, helping form the Himalayas. The Indian Ocean was born out of these colossal tectonic processes. It is not merely a body of water, it is a scar of continental separation.
and science has indeed discovered real fragments of continental material beneath parts of the Indian Ocean. Geologists speak of microcontinents and submerged continental fragments, such as Mauritia, associated with the region around Mauritius, and the Seychelles microcontinent, which is a genuine continental remnant. These are real findings, real rock, real crust, real evidence that vanished landmasses, in a geological sense, are not fantasy. But here is the critical distinction. None of this proves the popular image of Kumari Kandam as a recently submerged super-civilization south of India. Geology confirms broken land. It confirms ancient crust. It confirms a violent tectonic past. It does not confirm the full mythic picture of a vast, culturally unified lost empire swallowed by the ocean within human historical memory. And yet, this is where the tension becomes most interesting. Because to the scientific mind, not proven means caution. To the imaginative mind, not disproven in every detail means possibility. The ocean floor is difficult to study in fine resolution. Sediment buries older coastlines. Ancient shorelines formed during lower sea levels now lie underwater. Coastal settlements all over the world have been erased by erosion, flooding, tectonic change, or time. So while science does not support the grandest version of the legend, it also reminds us that the sea can hide more than we once thought. This is where the story sharpens, not into certainty, but into conflict. What do we trust more, instrument or inheritance, rock sample or ancestral memory, satellite data or a story repeated across generations? And here, at exactly this point, the legend becomes dangerous again. Because the scientific answer may be no, but the emotional answer still whispers yes. But if science says no, why does the heart say yes? Is it possible that the ocean hides something our instruments were never designed to find? And if all the evidence points one way, why does the silence beneath the waves still feel unfinished? Sometimes doubt is the strongest hook of all.
So, if science does not validate the grandest version of Kumari Kandam, why does the story remain alive? Because stories do not survive for centuries by being merely accurate. They survive by being necessary. Kumari Kandam endures because it speaks to several human needs at once. It offers antiquity, it offers dignity, it offers continuity after rupture. It offers a civilizational origin not dependent on colonial approval or outside validation. It offers the feeling that what is visible today is only a fragment of what once existed. For people whose language and history stretch deep into antiquity, the idea of a lost southern homeland is more than a mystery. It can become a declaration. We are older than what your records can prove. That is why the legend is emotionally powerful. Not because every claim inside it must be literally true, but because the story refuses reduction. It resists simplification. It resists erasure. It resists the arrogance of modernity, which often assumes that whatever cannot be measured cleanly must not matter. There is also a deeper human reason the legend survives. Flood stories exist almost everywhere. From ancient Mesopotamia to South Asia, from island cultures to sacred texts, water appears again and again as both creator and destroyer.
Water feeds crops, opens trade, and sustains life, but water also erases cities, graves, roads, ports, shrines, and names. It makes survivors, it makes refugees, it makes memory speak in symbols. And symbols travel farther than maps. That is why Kumari Kandam persists. Not because everyone agrees on what it was, but because almost everyone understands what it means to lose a world. Could that be the real power of the legend? That even when the evidence is contested, the wound feels recognizable? That perhaps what survives is not the exact event, but the emotional truth of displacement? A legend lives when it carries a wound.
Now, let us enter the version that lives in the imagination. See it as the mind sees it. A vast southern land under a dark red sky at evening, rivers moving like molten bronze, dense forests ringing with insects, parrots, and animal cries, temple courtyards warm under bare feet, palm leaf manuscripts stacked in cool stone halls, bronze lamps breathing sesame oil into the dusk, busy ports smelling of salt, resin, wet rope, fish scales, smoke, pepper, and sandalwood. Merchants unload pearls, priests face the horizon, children run through pillared corridors, musicians tune strings in the fading light, scholars debate language, astronomy, ethics, kingship, and the nature of time. And then the change. A season of storms grows longer. The surf pounds harder. Boats return late. The old fishermen stop joking. Dogs bark at the shoreline at night. The sea no longer sounds like distance. It sounds like approach. Another flood, another retreat, another village abandoned. At dawn, the beach is narrower. At dusk, the temple steps are wet. In the morning, crabs crawl where grain was stored. A burial ground collapses into the surf. The dead are taken with the living watching. There is something especially terrible about a civilization that does not die in fire, but in water. Fire is visible. Water is patient. Water comes back again and again and again. It soaks the threshold, poisons the field, weakens the wall, tears apart the jetty, lifts the floorboards, steals the road. Then one morning it enters the house. This is why lost civilizations haunt us so deeply, because we do not imagine only the fall of kings. We imagine kitchens, footsteps, lamps going out, a mother calling for her child through wind, a scholar trying to save a manuscript, a fisherman standing ankle-deep where the market used to be, a family looking back from higher ground and realizing the sea has learned their name. Kumari Kandam in imagination is not cold ruin, it is warm ruin, living ruin, a world interrupted while still breathing. And perhaps that is why it hurts. Because the legend is not only about grandeur, it is about intimacy destroyed. What is harder to mourn, the fall of an empire or the drowning of a doorway? Why do vanished worlds feel most real when we can smell the rain, hear the gulls, and touch the stone? And is that why this legend survives? Because it remembers ordinary life inside the catastrophe?
We do not grieve continents, we grieve homes.
Every legend changes once history, identity, and politics begin speaking through it. Kumari Kandam is no exception. Over time, it has appeared as literary memory, cultural symbolism, historical claim, civilizational pride, and at times even ideological weapon. And that matters because once a story leaves poetry and enters public identity, the stakes change. A legend inside literature can remain layered. A legend inside politics tends to harden. Part of Kumari Kandam's power lies in scale. It does not merely say that Tamil civilization is ancient, it suggests that Tamil civilization may be older, deeper, and more foundational than mainstream narratives have been willing to admit. In a world where historical prestige often becomes a contest, that is a powerful idea. But power always has a price. When people need a legend to be true in every literal detail, nuance begins to suffocate. Symbol becomes map, metaphor becomes measurement, emotional truth is forced into geological certainty, and the richer meaning of the story can begin to disappear. At the same time, skepticism without empathy can be just as shallow. To dismiss Kumari Kandam as just a myth is to miss why such stories endure. It ignores loss, memory, displacement, pride, cultural continuity, and the way ancient peoples often encoded catastrophe through sacred narrative rather than through modern scientific language. The challenge, then, is not to worship the legend blindly and not to mock it lazily. The challenge is to read it well, to ask what historical experiences may stand behind it, what literary traditions shaped its form, what political eras amplified its importance, and what does its persistence reveal about the people who continue to tell it. That is where serious thought begins, not in ridicule, not in blind belief, but in disciplined respect. Can a legend be culturally true without being geologically exact? Can a people preserve something real even when the outer form changes over centuries? And when a story refuses to disappear, is the real question whether it happened or why it had to survive. Respect the myth, interrogate the hunger behind it. So what might the Indian Ocean really conceal? Not necessarily a perfect lost empire of fantasy, but perhaps something more complicated and therefore more believable. The sea can hide ancient coastlines. It can bury settlements beneath sediment. It can distort memory by preserving fragments while erasing context. It can separate what once belonged together. And over thousands of years, even a local catastrophe can grow in cultural memory until it becomes cosmic. That is how legends expand. Not because they are false, but because they are alive. Perhaps Kumari Kandam was never one single thing. Perhaps it was many things layered together across time. A memory of rising seas, a literary image of loss, a civilizational claim, a philosophical homeland, a symbol of continuity after destruction. That would explain why it cannot be pinned down easily, because living myths resist single definitions. A real coastline may have vanished. That vanished coastline may have become ancestral memory. That memory may have become poetry. That poetry may have become identity. And identity may have reshaped the legend until it stood not just for land, but for origin itself. And this is where the story becomes universal, because every civilization, at some level, suspects that its visible past is only a fragment,
that something has been lost, something unwritten, something burned, drowned, scattered, or forgotten, something that official records will never fully restore. So maybe the mystery of Kumari Kandam is not just about what lies under the Indian Ocean. Maybe it is about why human beings cannot stop looking toward the horizon and asking whether the map is incomplete. What if the greatest thing lost was not land, but certainty? What if the deepest ruins are not beneath the sea, but inside cultural memory? And what if Kumari Kandam survives because all of us, in some form, believe there was once more than what remains? The sea hides ruins. Memory hides beginnings.
Kumari Kandam may never rise from the deep. There may be no final expedition that resolves the mystery forever. No temple staircase found untouched below the waves. No library of palm leaf manuscripts waiting in a sealed chamber beneath the seabed. No perfect discovery that ends the debate in one dramatic moment. But perhaps that is exactly why the legend remains alive. Because it asks a larger question than whether a continent sank. It asks how civilizations remember loss, how language survives disaster, how myth preserves dignity, how coastlines change faster than memory can accept, how people rebuild origin when the physical ground of origin is gone. In that sense, Kumari Kandam is already real. Real as cultural memory, real as inherited longing, real as a response to changing seas, real as a symbol of antiquity, real as the refusal of a people to let their beginnings be reduced to what survives on a modern map. Some will hear this story and demand proof. Others will hear it and feel recognition. Both responses matter. Because perhaps Kumari Kandam does not belong entirely to geology or entirely to myth. Perhaps it exists in the charged space between them, between shoreline and memory, between tectonics and poetry, between evidence and inheritance, between what sank and what refused to sink with it. So the next time you look at the southern edge of India on a map, do not see a border, see a question written in water, a question carried by storms, language, migration, and grief, a question that has outlived kingdoms, empires, and argument. How much of history is missing because it was never written? How much was written but drowned? And how much still survives, not in stone, not in museums, but in the stories people continue to tell against the silence? Because sometimes the lost world is not only beneath the sea, sometimes it lives in memory, waiting for someone to listen. Some worlds sink, their echo does not.